The skies above Altheon had always been calm, silver clouds drifting through soft purple light, bioluminescent forests humming quietly in the dusk. But now ash rained down where leaves once danced in the wind, and the peaceful hum had turned into screams. The Virelians, once a proud and peaceful race, ran through the ruins of their cities as the Zarketh Dominion closed in from orbit, their warships blotting out the sun, their mechanical soldiers burning everything below. Chancellor Reth Varen stood atop the last communication spire, watching his world collapse under fire and steel, his long fingers trembling over the ancient controls that had not been touched for over 1,000 years. The Council had forbidden it, and for good reason. It was not just a law, but a warning passed down through generations. Never contact the Deathworlders, never reach out to Earth. The stories were too dark, too violent, too terrifying to be legends. Earth was no ordinary world. It was a cursed place where everything killed, where survival bred monsters with minds sharper than any blade and hearts forged in endless war. But desperation is louder than caution, and Reth had no other choice. The Dominion would not stop until Altheon was dust. His people were scientists, artists, philosophers, but they had no armies, no weapons, and no way to fight back. With one final breath, he entered the Forbidden Code. The old satellites groaned as if in pain, and the spire lit up with symbols no one had seen in centuries. High above, a beacon surged out into the void, faster than light, coded in a language older than stars. SOS, origin Altheon. Status, extermination imminent. Request intervention. Target Earth. Across the galaxy, that signal moved through dark space, through dead sectors and cold silence, until it reached the edge of the Terran void, the region no one dared map, where all probes vanished and whispers said the Deathworlders still watched. For days, nothing happened. The skies remained full of Zarketh ships, and hope grew thin. Some believed the signal had failed, others said it was better that way. Perhaps it was a mercy not to awaken what slept in the black. But then, 3 days after the transmission, every Virelian comm system across the planet went dark. Screens flickered to black, symbols appeared unreadable, sharp and cold. Then one word, clear and simple, received. That same night, a ripple tore through the sky, silent but massive, and a ship unlike anything ever recorded emerged from fold space. It was not sleek, not polished, but brutal in shape. Black metal scarred from past wars, with hull markings in strange angular glyphs. No engines burned behind it. It simply hung there, unmoving and vast, and yet it made the Zarketh warships shudder. Altheon's moons reflected its surface like polished steel. Virelians stared up in silence, breath caught in awe and fear. The legends had said Deathworlders were chaos given form, nightmares with logic, beasts in human skin. Now they were here. A small transmission burst from the Terran ship. One word, again, permission. Reth Varen, his voice cracking, responded from the spire. Granted. Then came the storm. The Deathworlder ship opened like a maw, and from its shadow came smaller crafts, dark and winged, moving with impossible precision. They passed through the Zarketh fleet like scalpels, cutting apart ships without fire, without sound. Beams of light wrapped around hulls and crushed them like paper. The invaders tried to respond, but their weapons would not lock. Their targeting systems failed, their engines died mid-flight. It was not a battle. It was a message. The Zarketh fell, ship after ship, and then the Deathworlders stopped. Not a single word followed. No threats, no diplomacy, no warning. Only silence and the wreckage of what had once been a mighty fleet. And then, without a sound, the Terran ship turned to face the planet. Lights moved along its surface, scanning. Every region, every city, every being. Altheon had called for help. Earth had heard. But what had they really summoned? In the deepest chambers of the council tower, Varelians whispered in fear, wondering if they had traded one threat for another. The Chancellor stood alone before the display screen, watching the silent ship above. The Deathworlders had come, but their price had not yet been named. The Terran ship did not speak, move, or blink, yet its presence wrapped around the planet, like a shadow that refused to fade. And below, the people of Altheon watched with wide, silent eyes, unsure if they had been saved or sentenced. The air felt heavier now, as if the weight of the unknown pressed down on every rooftop and every breath, and even the trees, once alive with gentle songs, now stood frozen, waiting, listening. Then, at exactly the 4th hour of planetary dusk, the silence broke with a single sound, not loud but sharp, like a blade sliding free from its sheath, as a black spear-shaped shuttle descended from the massive ship above, cutting through the clouds like a needle through cloth. No flames, no engines, just motion so smooth it defied logic, and it came to rest in the center of the ruined capital, where broken towers leaned and fire still smoldered in the streets. From its belly, a ramp extended slow and precise, and from the dark armored figures emerged, each taller than a Varelian, each wrapped in matte black suits that seemed to drink in the light, their helmets hiding their faces, their movements silent and perfect, like machines. But they were not machines, because when the first one spoke, its voice rolled out across the square like thunder wrapped in steel, calm but cold, deep and final, as it asked just 3 words: "Who hurt you?" The Varelians who remained in the square fell to their knees, not out of worship, but out of fear, not of being punished, but of being noticed by something older than war and colder than space itself. The Chancellor, Reth-Varen, stepped forward, his long robes scorched from the fires of the invasion, and pointed a trembling finger toward the eastern sky, where the last of the Zarketh fleet still orbited, regrouping and preparing for a second strike. The lead Deathworlder, whose armor bore a single silver stripe across the chest, turned his head upward and simply said, "Understood," before raising a hand to the sky. At once, a low hum shook the ground as the Terran mothership split open, revealing dozens of long, thin weapons that looked more like towers than guns. And in the blink of a second, light struck out, not in beams, but in pulses that bent gravity and broke sound itself, and the heavens lit up as the Zarketh ships were, pierced, cracked, and reduced to silent, burning wrecks that fell like broken stars. It was not a fight, not a battle, not even war. It was a judgment carried out with perfect precision, and when it ended, there was no celebration, only smoke drifting across the sky and the silence of a species realizing they had awoken something that did not know how to stop once it began. The Deathworlders said nothing more that day, but their black shuttle remained in the capital, and soon more landed, each one bearing engineers, scientists, soldiers, and machines that reshaped the ruins into something unfamiliar. Hard metal walls, scanning drones, satellite uplinks, defensive towers, all growing from the wreckage like steel vines. Reth-Varen was invited aboard the central shuttle, and inside he met the human known as Commander Elias Voss, whose face, when he finally removed his helmet, was weathered and scarred, with eyes that held the weight of too many wars and a voice like ice breaking underfoot. He did not smile, did not blink much, and he wasted no time with small talk, as he asked only, "This, you understand that what begins cannot be undone?" And Reth, heart-pounding, nodded, because what choice did he have? His people were alive only because of the force that stood before him, a force that answered cries for help, not with kindness, but with overwhelming power. And now that force was here, standing on their soil, watching, waiting. Outside, children peeked from behind doors to stare at the strange beings who walked without fear and moved with purpose, and some whispered that Earth was not a planet, but a weapon that had learned to walk, to speak, and now it had heard them. Meanwhile, in orbit, The last piece of the Zarketh fleet sent out a desperate transmission to their homeworld. Do not return. Do not follow. Death has answered the call. But it was too late, because Earth never left a message half-finished. The humans began scanning the surrounding sectors, calculating threat levels, building defenses not just for Altheon, but for themselves, because as Commander Voss later told the Council, if you can be invaded once, you can be invaded again, and that is unacceptable to us. The Varelians started to whisper among themselves, questions forming like cracks in ice. How long would the Deathworlders stay? What did they truly want? Was this still help, or was this now occupation? But none dared speak aloud the real fear growing in their hearts. What if the stories were true, not just the ones about Earth's power, but the ones that said once Deathworlders arrive, they never leave, not because they cannot, but because they do not trust the galaxy enough to walk away. And so, beneath the glow of strange new satellites and the shadows of Terran warships, Altheon entered a new age, one born not of choice, but of survival. And as the stars above slowly faded, behind the outline of the Terran mothership, the people below waited to see whether the price of their SOS had truly been salvation, or something far worse. The sky over Altheon no longer looked like home. It was now filled with long silver trails from human drones, cold blue lights from scanning satellites, and the constant hum of machines that never slept. And though the Zarketh fleet had been destroyed, and no more bombs fell, the fear in the hearts of the Varelians had only changed shape. The enemy was gone, but the humans remained. And no one could say whether they were protectors or something far worse, because the Deathworlders did not celebrate victory, did not accept thanks, did not explain their plans. They simply worked, moved, watched, and waited. Commander Elias Voss walked through the rebuilt capital with soldiers at his side, his black armor gleaming like night metal. His helmet always sealed unless he was speaking to the High Council, and even then, he never stayed longer than needed, never answered questions with more than a sentence, and never smiled. The Varelians had begged him to stop the attack before the last Zarketh ships were destroyed, offering surrender terms and peace negotiations. But Voss had only tilted his head slightly and said, "We do not leave enemies behind," before giving a silent signal to his fleet. What followed was not war, but something colder, faster, more complete, as the Terran ship in orbit deployed a series of kinetic rods from low orbit, long tungsten spikes the size of towers, which struck from the sky without sound or warning, ripping through Zarketh dreadnoughts and planetary outposts in a blink, turning them to dust without fire, without smoke, without mercy. Varelians watching from the ground did not cheer. They stood frozen, stunned by the precision and cruelty of it, by how silent the death came, as if the humans had decided that sound itself was too generous a warning. Within an hour, every remaining Zarketh position was wiped from the system, and then just as quickly the humans began building again. No rest, no pause, only motion, only strategy. They constructed defense platforms, atmosphere filters, surveillance grids, all controlled from the main Terran command ship in orbit, which the Varelians had come to call the Eye, because it never blinked and never looked away. Rethvarin walked the halls of the old council tower, now repaired with strange black alloy and lined with glowing wires, his thoughts racing as he passed Terran officers tapping on transparent screens, speaking to each other in short bursts of code, ignoring him completely as if he were not a leader, but simply a bystander on his own world. He met again with Voss in the war room, a chamber cold and dark with a single round table glowing with holographic maps, red zones, blue zones, blinking dots that moved in real time, tracking life and death across continents. "You're not just here to protect us," Reth finally said, voice trembling not from anger, but from a quiet truth he didn't want to face. "You're building a fortress, a base, for Earth, not for us. And Voss didn't deny it. He only looked at Reth with tired eyes and said, "We answered your signal. This is the shape of our help. Mercy, like fire, burns what cannot be rebuilt." Those words echoed in Reth's mind long after the meeting ended, and he began to notice how carefully the humans moved through their cities, always watching, always mapping, their drones floating just above rooftops, their AI cores learning the layout of the planet, the culture, the language, the fears of its people. And as more ships arrived from deep space, carrying supplies, soldiers and engineers, it became clear that this was not a temporary operation. Earth had made a decision, and now Altheon was part of something larger, something colder, something that did not forget the past. The children of Altheon began learning Terran Standard in schools, rebuilt by humans, and the elders whispered stories of ancient Deathworlders returning to finish what had started eons ago, tales once thought myth, now spoken in hushed tones at night. The tipping point came when the Varelians discovered the remains of a Zarketh laboratory hidden deep in the mountains. Inside was a weapon, still half complete, designed to destroy the Varelian nervous system using tailored sound waves, and when they reported it to the humans, the Terran response was immediate. No court, no debate, no trial, just a drone strike that erased the entire mountain valley, weapon and all, from the surface of the planet, followed by a single message. From Voss, "We end threats, not arguments." Some Varelians protested, holding quiet gatherings in their cities, but the humans did not interfere. They simply watched, recorded, analyzed, until one night one of the protest leaders vanished. No trace, no sign, just gone, and no one dared speak her name again. A quiet fear spread, not of death but of silence, of being unseen, erased without sound or record. And Reth knew then that Altheon had become something different, not enslaved, not free, but balanced on a knife held in a human hand. And still, despite it all, part of him understood. Because the Zarketh would have left nothing, would have burned the oceans and poisoned the sky, and in the end the Deathworlders had saved them. But they had saved them in the only way they knew how, with overwhelming force and cold efficiency, like surgeons cutting away rot with no care for pain. As the stars turned above and the human fleet grew stronger, the question echoed across the planet, whispered from mouth to mouth, from child to elder, from city to city. If this is mercy, what does vengeance look like? And no one dared to imagine the answer. The cities of Altheon no longer looked like they once had. What were once tall, spiraling towers of crystal and glass were now reinforced with dark Terran alloy, surrounded by defense walls, scanner towers, and landing pads that pulsed with blue light. The streets buzzed not with music or market songs, but with the quiet hum of drones and the heavy steps of armored Terran soldiers patrolling in silence. And though the Zarketh threat had been erased, the air felt no lighter. Instead, a colder fear settled over the people, one that wore no face and offered no clear enemy to fight. Chancellor Reth Varen walked alone through the gardens near the council tower, now altered with strange mechanical routes placed by Terran engineers, designed to regulate the soil and monitor biosigns from orbit. Every tree and flower tracked, controlled, catalogued. The price of rescue had not been written in words, but in the slow, constant loss of control. Altheon was still alive, yes, but it was no longer free, and Reth felt the weight of every decision he had made, pressing into his bones like stone. His people had begged for salvation, and Earth had delivered it with fire and precision. But no one had warned them that salvation came with rules, structure, and the constant presence of something too large and cold to argue with. Late that night, a council session was called in secret, deep in the underground chambers, far from any Terran listening devices, though none could say for sure if such a place truly existed anymore. The room was dark, voices hushed, and all who gathered wore the same expression, tired, uncertain, afraid to speak too loudly. One counselor, an old historian named Meln, finally said what many had feared to voice. They do not ask. They build. They protect us, but they also replace us. If they stay longer, we will become a memory on our own soil. Silence followed, and Reth said nothing, because part of him agreed. But another part remembered the sky burning, the screams of children in the ruins. The day hope nearly died before Earth answered the call, and he could not forget it. As debate rose, a sudden interruption cracked the room, a message, urgent, flashing in red. Unauthorized vessel detected in low orbit. Unknown signature, no Terran clearance. The counselors froze. Reth stood quickly, heart pounding, because nothing unknown ever made it near Altheon anymore, not with the Terran eye watching from space. They all rushed to the surface, where the dark sky shimmered with light as a small, sleek vessel entered the atmosphere. Not Terran, not Zarketh, something else, its hull golden and marked with flowing glyphs. It landed in the far desert, far from any city, and within moments the Deathworlders were in motion. Terran gunships flew low over the land, scanning, surrounding, and within minutes the vessel was encased in a silent steel ring of soldiers, their weapons raised. Reth requested to join the investigation and was surprisingly allowed, though no one said why. When he arrived at the site, he found Commander Elias Voss standing before the alien vessel, arms crossed, unmoving, and the look on his face was not anger, but calculation, as if he already understood what this moment meant. The vessel opened. Slowly, and from it stepped three beings. Tall, robed, glowing softly from the inside, their movements slow and graceful. They called themselves the Solari, and they spoke not through mouths, but through pulses of light and sound. And they had come, they said, because they had received the same distress signal Altheon had sent into the void, only much later, delayed by dust storms in deep space. They offered aid, protection, and a safe haven on their world, away from war and away from Terran occupation, and for a moment, hope stirred in Reth's chest. But then he saw Voss step forward, helmet in hand, face grim, voice sharp. "You will leave. This planet is under Terran protection. Your offer is rejected." The Solari tilted their heads, surprised but calm, and said softly, "We were summoned by the dying. We do not answer to the ones who burn." But before the conversation could continue, the Terran drones activated, targeting systems locking on, and Voss gave a signal, not to fire, but to surround tighter, and his voice dropped low, barely a whisper. "There is no second invitation." The Solari, to their credit, did not argue further. They returned to their ship, which lifted and disappeared into the clouds, vanishing into space as quickly as it had come. No shots were fired, but the message was clear. Earth did not share. Not allies, not territory, not trust. Back in the council tower, Reth sat alone for hours, trying to decide if he should regret sending that signal into the void. If survival was worth this cage of protection, this rule without chains, this silence that looked like peace, but felt like waiting. The people had food, shelter, power, things they would have lost forever, but they also walked with eyes down, never knowing when they were watched or judged or replaced by something stronger, colder, better. Days later, a file appeared on Reth's private terminal. No sender, no signature, just a single file labeled Prior Response Record. He opened it and saw a recording, fuzzy but clear enough. Another world, another species, sending the same signal Altheon had sent, begging Earth for help. And then came footage of Earth's arrival, machines falling from orbit, cities flattened, enemies erased, and afterward, silence. No sign of the native species, no voices, only Terran outposts and patrols and factories mining the planet's core. The screen faded to black, then displayed two words: pattern confirmed. Reth sat still, his blood cold, as he realized the full meaning. The price of rescue was not measured in credits or time or even obedience. The price was sovereignty, was identity, was becoming a place where Earth could build its future, protected at all costs, but never free again. And outside, above the once beautiful sky of Altheon, the Terran eye blinked once, then resumed its eternal watch, as if daring the world to speak one final word out of turn. Beneath the surface of Altheon, in the deep tunnels once used for mining, rare crystal veins, quiet voices began to grow louder, hidden from the watchful drones and satellites of the Deathworlders above. And though fear still ruled the streets and the skies glowed with Terran lights, something had shifted in the hearts of the people. A slow awakening, a quiet burning that had no name yet, but carried weight like thunder waiting to break. It began with whispers among engineers and students, between farmers and old veterans, those who had lived before the Terran arrival and still remembered what the world felt like when the sky belonged to them. Rithvarin, now watched more than ever by his own people and by Terran command, walked carefully through his days, feeling pressure from both sides, one asking for calm, the other asking for answers. And it was in this tense silence that a name began to appear, spoken with care and caution. Lyra Dax, the missing protest leader, thought gone or taken, had survived, and not only that, she was organizing, gathering minds, not soldiers, not weapons, but thinkers, coders, planners, people with patience and ideas instead of guns. Deep in the ruins of a forgotten city, Lyra and her circle had found something, an old Varelian archive, untouched by war and unnoticed by the Terran scans, filled with lost schematics, ancient tech, systems that could hide signals, mask heat signatures, and mimic terrain data. With it, they built the first shadow, a place invisible to orbit, a space where Terran drones could not see. And in that space, they began to ask one question over and over. How do you move against an empire that never sleeps? The answer, they decided, was not in war, but in seeds, tiny acts, subtle changes, gentle moves that would look like nothing at all, until the roots beneath the soil were too deep to pull out. One by one, they turned Terran sensors slightly off track, made drone patrols wander 2 minutes late, rewired streetlights to flicker in coded patterns only they understood, and all the while they gathered stories from across the planet. Stories of families relocated by Terran force, of leaders silenced, of ships grounded for security reasons, and data collected by children pretending to play. In the middle of this quiet storm, a young man named Jarrow, once a translator for Terran engineers, now worked as a double voice, feeding small misdirections into Terran systems. Nothing dangerous, nothing large, just enough to create questions, to slow reactions, to blur the perfect timing Earth relied on. And though the humans still ruled the sky, they could not hear the quiet rhythm beneath their feet, could not see the growing shape of something that did not look like rebellion, but tasted like it. Reth heard of this movement slowly, first from a guard who vanished after reporting strange lights outside the city, then from a former counselor who claimed to have seen Lyra Dax in the mountain shadows, and finally from a message delivered to him by hand, unsigned, reading only, "You were right to call for help, but now we must help ourselves." He sat with those words for days, unsure whether to warn the Terrans or protect the hope they carried, and each day he delayed. Rebellion moved forward, not with fire but with silence, and then came the moment that shook everything. During a Terran parade meant to celebrate 1 year of planetary stabilization, one of the marching drones suddenly broadcasted an old Varelian anthem, long banned, its signal hacked mid-march, and for 12 seconds the entire city heard the sound of their past echo through the streets, before the feed was cut and the drone fell from the sky. Terran soldiers moved fast, locking down the district, arresting 37 people, and Voss himself appeared on every screen across Altheon with a single message. There is no tolerance for chaos. We saved you. Do not make us remind you what we saved you from. But something had cracked, not in the walls of the city, but in the silence of the people, because for those 12 seconds, they had remembered who they were. From that day, more signals appeared, small and fleeting, music from hidden speakers, flags appearing and disappearing before drones could record them, Terran sensors glitching at key moments, and everywhere whispers of Lyra Dax grew into stories. Of her being a ghost, a myth, a flame that could not be caught. And the Terrans knew something had changed, even if they didn't know how deep it ran, because the machines began logging more errors, the soldiers began staying longer on patrol, and Voss held more meetings behind closed doors, face grim and voice sharper each time he spoke in public. Deep underground, Lyra listened to intercepted Terran transmissions and smiled quietly, not in victory, but in understanding, because this was not about beating Earth's might, but about waking Altheon's soul, about teaching the people that safety without freedom is not peace, and mercy without choice is not kindness. And as her network grew, spreading through the deep layers of the planet like vines in old stone, one final plan began to take shape. Not an attack, not a war, but a signal, one strong enough to reach beyond the Terran eye, beyond Earth, beyond even the Solari who had once come in peace. A signal not of distress but of defiance, carrying a simple message in every tongue Altheon had ever spoken. We live still, we choose still, we rise still. And when that signal left the ground, carried by a stolen Terran satellite repurposed by Lyra's engineers, no one knew who would answer, or if anyone would. But the people of Altheon no longer cared, because the seeds had been planted. The ground had been stirred, and the roots of rebellion were no longer hidden. They were growing, the signal had been sent, and though it was brief, no longer than 30 seconds, it rippled through space like a spark thrown into dry grass. And everyone on Altheon waited, breath held, wondering who, if anyone, would hear it, and what would happen if they did. But it was Earth that heard it first, faster than any alien friend or distant ally. And their response came not in words, but in action, sudden and cold, like winter sweeping across a warm land. For the moment the signal left orbit, something deep within the Terran systems activated, a buried order locked behind thousands of failsafes, known only to the highest. Commanders, Reckoning Protocol, Tier 3, designed for only one purpose, to suppress planetary instability with overwhelming precision. And when it triggered, the sky of Altheon lit up with movement, hundreds of black-armored drop pods raining from orbit, fast and quiet, landing without warning in every city, every town, even the smallest villages, and from each pod emerged elite. Terran enforcers, unmarked, silent, eyes hidden behind glass, programmed with one task: restore compliance no matter the method. Rethvaran was pulled from his home before dawn, escorted not by diplomats, but by machines with no words, taken to the Grand Dome, now surrounded by fences and towers, where Commander Voss waited, colder than ever, eyes like steel, as he said, "You allowed this," and Reth wanted to argue, to say he didn't send the signal, but he knew it wouldn't matter. The Reckoning Protocol didn't care who started the fire, only that it burned. Across the planet, entire blocks were blacked out. Drones, scrambled signals, and the hidden spaces Lyra Dax had built one by one began to fall, not because they were weak, but because Earth had planned for this. They had seen rebellion before, and their machines were not just fighters. They were hunters, made to trace patterns, detect heat changes, even track emotion through sound and speech. And in the shadow vault beneath the old mining city, Lyra and her closest team worked in silence, sweat on their faces, trying to move what data they could before the last node went dark. She knew they had days at most, maybe only hours before they were found, and even though fear sat in her chest like a stone, she kept working, because she knew something Earth did not. The signal had been received, not by aliens or distant governments, but by Althion's people, and even now they were moving, helping in small ways, hiding rebels, jamming scanners, faking IDs, spreading false trails, and for the first time, it was not a few fighting for many, it was many, each. Doing a little, which together became something the Reckoning Protocol could not quite catch. In the city of Tirax's Reach, a group of teenagers used old festival lights to blind drone cameras just long enough for couriers to escape. In the southern farms, elders told stories over encrypted channels disguised as lullabies, sending maps and warnings hidden in verse. Even a few former Terran allies, translators, technicians, teachers, began to turn, slipping small flaws into code, feeding Lyra's network with just enough to keep them breathing. But Earth was not slow to adapt. Within days, all transport was locked. All screens played only one message on repeat. Order is peace. Defiance is death. Compliance is protection. And people began to vanish again, as they had in the first. Days after the invasion, only now, no one was pretending anymore. Lyra knew she could not fight Earth's full force head-on, so she turned to one final plan, something even her team had feared to attempt. Reawakening the planet's ancient AI defense system, buried and deactivated centuries ago during the Unity War, long before Earth arrived. It was dangerous, unstable, and if triggered wrong, it could destroy whole cities. But it was the only tool left that Earth hadn't fully cracked, and with the data pulled from the Varelian archive and the minds of 3 gifted codecrafters, they had a chance. As Earth's soldiers moved closer, Lyra and her team descended into the Forbidden Core, beneath the old capital ruins, where the ancient system slept, rusted but not dead. And she stood before the control chamber, lit by green fire from ancient conduits, and whispered, "If we fall, let it be on our feet," then activated the first node. Across Altheon, pulses surged through the old energy grid, tripping alarms in Terran orbit, and for the first time, Earth hesitated, not because of fear, but confusion, for their systems began to glitch, their scanners overloaded with phantom signals. Old defense satellites came online with unknown protocols, and an AI voice, long silent, spoke once more. Planetary autonomy restored. Foreign override rejected. Defensive lockdown initiated. Voss stared at his console in disbelief as entire command channels went dark, and for the first time since landing on Altheon, he looked uncertain, not because of violence, but because of unpredictability, something Earth could not control easily. In the shadows, Lyra sent one last message to Reth, who sat locked in the Grand Dome, guarded and isolated. "This isn't freedom yet, but it's our turn to speak." And as the Terran eye blinked, confused by the new defense codes and the chaotic resistance below, a wave of silence fell, like the pause before lightning strikes, and everyone knew across every corner of the planet that the true battle was about to begin. Not for survival, but for identity, and this time they would not go quietly into protection. They would fight, not as soldiers, but as a people who had learned what mercy without choice truly meant, and who now dared to answer it with fire of their own.